everyone. So I'm here to talk about Zelda and shit. I love Zelda. I think most people do. I'm here to talk about the thematic aspects of Zelda specifically and how Nintendo seemed to have forgotten about what made the first few games so special, or maybe they decided to do some new things that don't really seem all that cohesive with their initial ideas for the franchise. It's kind of a retrospective, but mostly focused on thematic elements. So yeah. Alright, I got a little disclaimer here. This video will be mostly me talking, but I also have a script, so let me read that here first. This video will focus mainly on the thematic aspects of Zelda. Gameplay and level design will not be discussed in depth. I tried dissecting the concept I refer to as thematic structure in my other videos, so go check those out if you want. Alright, without further ado, let's talk about the game that started it all. The Legend of Zelda on the NES is a groundbreaking game, a masterpiece that took concepts that had been established by earlier games from that era and expanded upon them tenfold. It was an instant classic and still holds up to this day, almost 40 years later. It tells the story of Link, a brave young boy clad in green on a quest to save the Triforce from the evil Ganon, who is hidden away in his lair somewhere in Hyrule. So, that's the background text that you get before playing the game. What playing the game actually feels like is a little bit different. The text is important because it gives you context for what is going on. And that's what I usually refer to as thematic structure. But playing the game is the only way to really understand what makes it special. So me talking about the experience doesn't really do it justice. To really get the full picture of what makes Zelda special, you really need to play the first NES game. Like, you need to play all the fucking games, basically, to really grasp the true magnitude of Zelda, because it's been around for a long time. It sounds a little hyperbolic, the way I'm talking about this game, because you look at it and, it's just a bunch of pixels. You have this green guy moving around, it's like, who gives a shit? But it really is pretty fantastic. Like I said, you gotta play this game to really understand what makes it so special. And right off the bat, the game teaches you how things work around Hyrule. First, you enter this cave and an old man offers you a weapon. So, it's this reward for exploring, for trying to uncover a mystery. You're immediately rewarded for that. And, it's just a sample. You get a taste of what's to come. But the whole game is like this. You go into caves and you uncover mysteries. You get the pieces of the Triforce and you ultimately defeat Ganon by using everything that you've learned, all your arsenal, your bow, the arrows, the rafts, whatever, the bombs. All of it is important. It's like an adventure unfolding. It's really something special. Not only is that exciting, but also significant in a spiritual level, which is something that might not make a whole lot of sense to some people, I imagine, but it really does make a lot of sense to me. Collecting the pieces of the Triforce, going a step further, going deeper. It's all part of the Zelda experience, and it's something that makes the series so special to me. And of course, defeating Ganon with the sacred power, the sacred arrow. It's fantastic. Ganon himself is an interesting opponent who prefers to evade Link rather than confronting him directly. He sticks to the darkness, that's his element of choice, and he uses that power to deceive and destroy. Forcing him to face the light of the Triforce and ultimately kill him with the sacred arrow is one of the most satisfying moments in NES games in general. It's absolutely amazing. The second game continues the story while putting more emphasis on Link's growth as a character, which completely justifies Nintendo cranking up the difficulty for the second game. As a result of Link being a little older, his mastery of swordplay and interacting with the townsfolk is much more emphasized, which helps the second quest stand out more. Link also fucks in this game, which is great. And rather than collecting sacred artifacts, Link has to put things back in their place, which I think is appropriate. He's already completed his sacred quest of finding the Triforce in the last game. This time around, he's, just returning some things to their proper place. I think it's a pretty neat touch. At the end of the game, Link has to face off against himself, his own shadow. The last thing that he needs to do to fully grow as an adult, to become the man that he needs to be to save Hyrule, or to keep Hyrule prosperous for the rest of time. I also want to emphasize that both NES titles end with Link and Zelda being together, because Link uses the Triforce to reawaken Zelda in this game. It's not exactly clear how she was put under this sleeping spell in the first place, or if it's the same Zelda as the first game, but honestly, it doesn't really matter, because the imagery, the legend, Link's quest, everything, it just speaks for itself. It doesn't really need any justification beyond that. At least I don't think it does. But if you really look for it, maybe you can find a story hint or two. Yeah, you go ahead and do that if it strikes your fancy. But what is important is that their union seems to signify a great prosperity for Hyrule. And in Zelda 2, it feels all the more definitive. So overall, it's pretty awesome to see how the first two games form this comprehensive narrative when put side by side. It's not very common for the series to attempt something like this, with the future titles and whatnot. So let's talk about A Link to the Past now. I love A Link to the Past. I already talked about this game before. It's a remake of the first game, or a soft reboot, or whatever the fuck Super Metroid is, compared to the original Metroid. It's basically the same. They took concepts from the first game and amplified the shit out of them, made something even more exciting. It's like, taking things to the next level. That was the whole idea for the Super Nintendo. And A Link to the Past is a great example of that. It took elements from the first game and really made them extra special. It's a phenomenal game. The story is more complex, there are characters that interact and change the course of the narrative, the scope is larger, and there are way more hidden goodies to find. This game rocks, but what really makes it special is the Dark World, which is brilliant from a narrative, visual, and gameplay perspective. This is a world created from Ganon's will. It is crawling with dangerous monsters and powerful demonic entities that guard its most well-hidden secrets. Link is the only person brave enough to confront all of these terrors, to save the missing maidens and rescue Zelda, as well as the complete Triforce, which he has to take from Ganon himself. All of the elements that made exploring Hyrule in the original game so awesome are still here. Though, I should point out that this game focuses a bit more on its narrative, so exploration has been de-emphasized somewhat compared to the original NES titles, which is perfectly fine for this game because there's still a lot to explore, to find. Some key items that are necessary to complete the game are just out there and you need to figure out how to get them, which is pretty amazing. Ganon was given more of a backstory, and it is in this game that we find out that his real name is Ganondorf. Ganon is his monster name, per se. The wicked thief who stole the Triforce and gained control over the Sacred Kingdom. I personally really like this addition to his backstory. Ganon is a bit of an elusive bastard in the original games, so the fact that he is a thief makes perfect sense. I also really like the idea that this huge demonic entity was at one point human. It makes it all the more disturbing. He also has an ally in the form of Aghanim, and Aghanim is scary, dude. I don't know what it is about this guy, but he freaks me out. Something about the fact that he creates duplicates of himself. He seems to exist in two places at a time. The fact that he killed the king, enslaved all the soldiers, that he's working for Ganon, and he may be an incarnation of Ganon in the light world, which is completely impossible. But he's there somehow. He's also the one responsible for killing Link's uncle, who is revealed to be part of a lineage of soldiers, and Link is the only member left after his death, which is so fucking awesome, dude. What a cool story. What a cool backstory for Link. If I had one complaint about this narrative, it would be that Zelda, from The Legend of Zelda, is not really all that important. In the beginning, she helps Link, she introduces him to his destiny, to what he needs to do. But after Link rescues her, she's she's just like done, you know, like the two of them just go their separate ways. It's a little disappointing. Especially after Link defeats Ganon and he saves the world using the Triforce. Zelda's not even there! Like, what the fuck? I already said that Link and Zelda being together seem to represent prosperity to Hyrule. I think it's entirely possible that their descendants end up ruling Hyrule, giving it form, shaping it for the rest of time. Assuming, of course, that Link and Zelda end up, you know, together. But I think that's the point. To me, that always seemed like that's the point. In this case, not so much. That's something that they forgot about over time. It's still a fantastic game. The way it ends is still pretty cool, but I feel like it's missing something. Let's talk about Ocarina of Time now. It came out in '98, and so did I. Would you look at that? This game marks the breaking point for Nintendo's incredible track record of only making renowned masterpieces in the Zelda series. It is still incredible. I'm saying that the games that came after Ocarina of Time didn't live up to the expectations of fans. By putting the world in 3D, introducing the races that would become a staple to the Zelda series, enriching the dungeons and narrative with incredible detail, Ocarina blasted the series into the freaking stratosphere in terms of scope and world building. To this day, Ocarina stands out as a title with remarkable authenticity, despite having borrowed so many elements from A Link to the Past. How so, you may ask? Well, let's take the 7-year gap as an example. It's clearly inspired by the Dark World in A Link to the Past, but narratively distinct, given how it's literally what the world will look like in 7 years. Instead of it being an invisible world plagued by abstract nightmares, it is exactly what the world will become in 7 years, because Link forgot to lock the fucking door, for some reason, to the Temple of Time, and couldn't be bothered to, like, chase after Ganondorf. I never really understood that part, to be honest. Okay, what we have here is a game that presents a much more immediate and political threat, opposed to the more spiritual, ancient threat of A Link to the Past. Despite preferring the narrative in A Link to the Past, I can appreciate Ocarina's for being more complementary and unique. Like poor spiritual development leads to a decadent political climate. Those things are complementary, you know? You may think that Ocarina isn't really all that political, but it is, in a way. Ganondorf is trying to usurp the throne by tricking the king into believing him. And he then kills the king, infiltrates the Sacred Realm, and takes control of Hyrule Castle. And then he creates his own version of the castle upon the foundation of what it was before. He's much more interested in establishing a dominion over Hyrule as opposed to taking over the entire world and then the cosmos, which is what he says in A Link to the Past. With its narrative ambition, Ocarina unfortunately de-emphasized exploration even further, and it started to become a big problem for the overall experience. Hyrule is largely barren and empty, with the exception of some shitty caves that really aren't all that great. Gone were the days of stumbling across an essential item but just fucking about in Hyrule, which really hurts that adventurous feeling, and this is something that would only get worse, as I'm sure you already know, with each subsequent title in the Zelda series. That's before Nintendo decided to drastically reshape the Zelda series and bring back a lot of that exploration that had been missing for so many years, which I think it's a really great idea, but I don't like how Breath of the Wild executed on it, but we'll talk about that once we get to Breath of the Wild, Jesus Christ. Ocarina of Time is far from being the most egregious example because it still really has a lot of cool secrets to find. It's just Hyrule Field that's a little empty. And that, coupled with the abundance of standout moments and overall character, still makes Ocarina of Time a fantastic experience. However, there is one thing about Ocarina that I really don't like very much, and that's its villain. Yeah, Ganondorf. Ganondorf is an exceptionally rare Gerudo male, a sorcerer, deceiver, and a thief. He's referred to as the King of Thieves, and I'm not sure what the fuck that means, because how can thieves have a king? They're thieves, you know? Doesn't that go against the... whatever. As a sorcerer, he's able to conjure up demons and shit, but how the hell is he doing that? He's just pulling these guys out of his ass. He's like a magician pulling rabbits out of a hat, you know? It doesn't really make sense. In A Link to the Past, Ganon is able to summon demons because he can just create them. He has the Triforce. He can do whatever the fuck he wants. But in Ocarina of Time, Goma, for example, where the hell did Goma come from? Or what about King Dodongo? Is he Ganondorf's pet? Does he walk around with that creature on a leash? You know what I mean? I don't really understand how Ganondorf is able to do these things, because he has no affiliations with demons, as far as we know, and he's not a demon himself, not until he becomes Ganon, very late in the game. So, we have a problem here. Ganondorf is clearly based on Aghanim, but Aghanim is a servant of darkness. Ganondorf wants to rule the world. He's not serving anybody. So they took Aghanim's character and changed him completely. They took the essentials of what makes Aghanim scary and infused Ganon with those elements. They took two characters that were clearly meant to exist separately and combined them into something that is not more than the sum of its parts, it's less. It's bizarre. How did Nintendo think that this was going to be the villain for the rest of the series? I have no idea. It would be like if at the end of Yoshi's Island, instead of fighting Baby Bowser, you fight Bowsdorf. And then in every single Mario game that comes after that one, he is the main villain, and they just forget about Bowser. You know? It's the stupidest shit. I hate Ganondorf. I think he's really lame. And I find it funny that in Smash, Sakurai gave him Captain Falcon's moveset because he couldn't be bothered to make Ganon his own unique moveset. I think that Sakurai is onto something. He knows that this character sucks. We're on the same page. I mean, I said that Sakurai watches my videos all the time, and he does, you know. You're gonna have to take my word for it. Anyway, moving on, back to Zelda. Alright, let's talk about the Wind Waker now. And let's start by addressing the elephant in the room. Ganondorf is back. He is definitely the main villain. There is no Ganon here, and it's ridiculous. Like, he has an entire army of moblins, and you never see him interact with any of them at any point. I have no idea why they work for Ganondorf, or the Darknuts, or the Peahats, or the whatever the fucks, the Octoroks. But whatever. Ganondorf is back. In the Wind Waker, he has a much bigger presence. He talks. You learn more about his backstory, why he decided to be evil, about his motivations, why he wants the Triforce, etc. And he is a more compelling character in this game. I think he works. And Ganon doesn't appear at all, except for this fight where he's a puppet. So it's almost like, in the Wind Waker's interpretation of the story, Ganon doesn't really exist. He's merely a creation of Ganondorf, something he uses to intimidate and destroy his opponents. And I think that's a pretty cool idea. Now, someone might argue that, oh, that's not really Ganon, you know, it's a puppet that he made and he can still transform into Ganon, even though he never does. And to that I say, shut up, let's continue. I really like the overarching narrative of this game, how Hyrule was flooded. It is symbolic, you know, it's something that happens in the Bible, the Great Flood. It happens in other... There are other iterations of that same story, because it's archetypal, it's spiritual, it's significant, and I like it. I really like how the conflict between Hyrule's King Daphne's the third something, and Ganondorf was frozen in time because the goddesses decided to flood all of Hyrule. And now Link and Zelda must finish their confrontation and finally put an end to this madness. Fans of Ocarina can certainly feel that this game is a continuation of that game's story, much like how Zelda 2 is a continuation of the first game. And the Wind Waker doesn't shy away from referencing Ocarina of Time directly, much like how Zelda 2 did, which is pretty unique and something that doesn't really happen that often in the series. It does imply that Link ultimately defeating Ganon at the end of Ocarina wasn't really all that important because he came back, which, you know, makes Link seem not all that triumphant in Ocarina in retrospect. Even Nintendo points out in their crackpot theory that Link might have gotten himself killed in Ocarina in their timeline, their ridiculous timeline that they have, which, you know, kind of sucks for Link in that game. It does make him seem less competent in Ocarina for some reason. And I think that the reason for that is that in Ocarina, Link is not really an adult. He is a child, but he exists in the body of an adult in that game's narrative. At the end, when he finally defeats Ganon, Zelda doesn't even hook up with him or anything like that, because that would be weird. Instead, she sends him back in time, so he can live the rest of his childhood. Which is strange, because I figured that in Ocarina, Link defeating Ganon is him finally achieving manhood. You know? He doesn't need to be a kid anymore. His childhood is over. From that day forward, he is a man. He has grown. But no. And because of this decision, Link also has to save Termina in Majora's Mask. I'll talk a little bit more about Majora's Mask later, but it is a very strange decision that Zelda made. It doesn't seem all that wise. Anyway, in the Wind Waker, Link and Zelda have to rediscover each other and ultimately forge a bond at the end of the game for the sake of the prosperity of the new kingdom that isn't Hyrule. But first, they need to resolve this old political conflict that was silenced by the goddesses. This narrative reveals a clear intention from the developers to leave the past behind, which is interesting and very telling. At this point, I feel like they really wished to move on from the past and craft something new. Which makes sense because the first few Zelda games tell stories that inspire. They are products of a big bang of creative ideas that, you know, over time fizzled out a little bit. And I feel like The Wind Waker is this great breaking point when they decided that enough was enough and they wanted to make something new. That's what it feels like to me. As a game, I don't think The Wind Waker is one of the best in the Zelda series. The Great Sea, for example, is supposed to be incredible, but it's mostly just filler. You fight the same giant squids over and over, you find the same caves, the same outposts, the same submarine things with cannons on top. It's not really all that exciting, and that's a real shame because the Great Sea is supposed to be the ocean, and you put like the ocean and fantasy together and you create some really incredible things. From Greek mythology we have Scylla and Charybdis, right? From Norse mythology we have the Kraken and some other sea creatures. But in Zelda in the Wind Waker we have nothing. We have this giant Octorok that swallows you up and spits you out if you fail to shoot its targets, its eyes, multiple times with your cannon. It's just a minigame. Conceptually, it's really lacking something. Also the fact that you explore the whole Great Sea on a little boat and not a ship. Take Sonic Rush Adventure, for instance. In that game, in order to reach certain locations of the world, the overworld, you have to construct different ships. You basically just play different minigames by doing so, but I find it much more thematically satisfying, narratively satisfying than Link just going around in a little boat and do everything. I still respect the Wind Waker's attempt to give Ocarina of Time's story some proper closure, since it ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, with Ganondorf saying that he would get his revenge and all that. Oh my god, my cat is driving me crazy, holy shit! So, on that note, I think it's nice. And the ending of The Wind Waker is really something special, with Link stabbing Ganondorf in his forehead with the Master Sword. He turns to stone and is forgotten forever, alongside the Kingdom of Hyrule, which is sacrificed by King Daphnes III. I don't remember his full name, but yeah. It's awesome. It's an awesome ending. And how Link and Zelda decide to embark on a new journey together, Zelda now being Tetra. It's awesome. It's amazing. And then he comes back. Ganondorf comes back because they have to keep bringing him back. He's a popular character from the Zelda series. In Twilight Princess, it's one of the most jarring endings to a game. Like, he didn't need to be in that story at all. But I'm not going to talk about the Twilight Princess in detail. I find it remarkably interesting. I find it an amazing game. Despite the fact that it reuses old elements that don't really belong there. And that's really the biggest problem with the Zelda series, how it insists on bringing back these old elements despite the fact that nobody really understands them anymore. That huge creative burst that created the series has fizzled out completely, and now they have to keep injecting the series with new ideas, despite the fact that it needs to be renewed from the ground up. And you would think that I love Breath of the Wild for those exact reasons, right? Because it recreated Zelda from the ground up. But I really, really don't. I really don't. The narrative in Breath of the Wild is absolutely terrible. Like, wow, man, it's so bad. 100 years ago, Ganon came back, but was sealed away by Link and Zelda, and a shit ton of guardians, the 4 divine beasts, Benito Mussolini and the Big Meanie. They all worked together to stop him. But then he came back again and decided, you know what, you guys are a bunch of fucking bullies, so I'm gonna use your machines against you. And then he killed everybody except Link and Zelda. Link was injured and he was forced into some sort of like hypersleep. It took him 100 years to heal properly, which I don't know why it took that long. Like, it seems a little weird. Like, was he dead? Is that why it took so long? They had to rebuild his body. And Zelda was, she stayed behind in Hyrule Castle, but Link doesn't really remember that. He's got amnesia. Oh wow, look at that. And now you gotta find out what the fuck is going on. You need more context to kill Ganon. Like, why? Just kill Ganon. Like, thematically speaking, I think it would make more sense to just storm Hyrule Castle and take down Ganon as quickly as possible. Forget about exploring the world. Ganon is right fucking there. Just kill his ass and save the day. What exploring is good for is finding the 4 divine beasts that help you defeat Ganon in the end. But it's such an easy final fight. Why do you need that? In Metroid Zero Mission, collecting everything gives you a harder final fight at the end of the game, which I think is more satisfying. But in Zelda, it makes the final fight easier, in Breath of the Wild specifically. It's such a strange idea. And again, thematically, what's the logic there? Link has to purify the land? Sure, but why can't he do that after he kills Ganon? Wouldn't that make it easier? Like, all the signs point to killing Ganon as quickly as possible. That completely defeats the exploration. And I was left with a very strange taste in my mouth after I finished Breath of the Wild, because it all seemed so daft and pointless. I didn't get it. Like, what was the point of all that exploration? I spent hours playing Breath of the Wild, but none of it seemed important. Looking back, it was just a big waste of time. I had fun, but I gained nothing. And that's a big shame. So how could Nintendo have made Breath of the Wild more interesting? I'm not sure. I thought about them using the story that they had in Skyward Sword in Breath of the Wild. That would make it a little more interesting, because in Skyward Sword, Link and Zelda exist in this paradise land, and they're basically Adam and Eve. And then Zelda is pulled away from that paradise by a mysterious force, and Link has to find her on the surface world. And that would be an interesting premise for Breath of the Wild. Link would be exploring this new world, having no idea what the hell is going on. And then he sees Ganon for the first time, and he would understandably be completely terrified. He would probably not want to get any closer to Ganon, because what if Zelda's not even there, you know? What if she's like on a completely different place that is much more peaceful? It would, thematically, narratively, it would make logical sense for Link to avoid Ganon in that case, but no. In Breath of the Wild, facing Ganon head-on is the most logical conclusion that you can make from the beginning. Even though the king says otherwise, he's full of shit. Yeah. It's just an excuse. Like, go explore because that's, you know, how the game was designed. It feels weak. It's just weak. It feels like they took a bunch of ideas that are interesting, but they just made a hodgepodge of ideas that they are not harmonious. They're not in harmony with each other. And what's funny is that from a visual standpoint, you also see things that don't seem to blend well with each other. Breath of the Wild has a lot more technology than the other Zelda games, and it's advanced technology that seems a little out of place in Zelda. Everything is so medieval, but at the same time you have like these big-ass towers that scan the area. The Sheikah tablet, which is magical and technological at the same time. Link can ride a bike and all that. It seems a little weird. There are mechanical guardians and shit. I think it's a little bit all over the place. I'm also not a fan of the voice acting, not because I don't think that voice acting could work in Zelda, but because the voice acting in Breath of the Wild is really terrible. The real reason I think Breath of the Wild doesn't really work is because despite the fact that they are injecting new ideas into Zelda to make it feel unique and fresh again, they are missing the point of what actually needs to happen for the series to continue to exist. So I only focused on these 6 Zelda games in particular, the NES games, Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, and Breath of the Wild, and there's a reason for that. The reason I only selected these 6 games is that they show a trend of a sort of thematic decline for the series. The first 3 games actually, are special and very connected to the core of the series, but as soon as Ocarina of Time shows up, they start injecting the series with ideas that don't really seem to make a whole lot of sense, even though they work in the context of, you know, that game in particular. Ganondorf being a clear example. He doesn't really contribute much to the Zelda series, but he works in Ocarina of Time because that game is a little more political than abstract. If they used a huge demon boar as opposed to a more political human figure, it wouldn't really work. The king would never trust a huge demon boar, but he could logically trust Ganondorf. Maybe not logically, but understandably. In the Wind Waker, Ganondorf is back, and I'm not a fan of his character, but he works in that game's narrative. Then Twilight Princess shows up, and Ganondorf is completely out of place. They keep insisting on bringing him back. Alright, so in Breath of the Wild, they decided to renew the series with fresh new ideas, but it feels like they are still using the same skeleton. And it's become hollow at this point. And it needs to be dismissed completely for something new to take its place. That may seem like an extreme solution, like I'm out of my fucking mind here, but look, listen. Majora's Mask is a phenomenal game. And it is, at its core, a Zelda game. It's very similar to Ocarina of Time, actually. Even though it has a lot of weird elements that seem completely different, at their core, they are similar. I'm not talking about the assets, how they reuse the assets from Ocarina. It has nothing to do with that. Majora's Mask is a game about healing. It's a game about purifying the land. And it ends with a final confrontation with a demon that represents hatred. It's the scourge of life. Everything that Link stands for, Majora is the opposite. It's the incarnation of evil, and by defeating that monster, Link is able to finally put this hatred, this wickedness to rest. He purifies the land and he gives people hope. Link's Awakening is another example of a Zelda game that doesn't seem all that concerned with bringing back old elements for the sake of nostalgia or familiarity or whatever. It has its own ideas and it is unique. It's another title that really stands out for its narrative ambition and its quirky little ideas here and there that make it unique. But at its core, it is the same kind of experience that you get from A Link to the Past. It's a game about uncovering secrets, about confronting manifestations of evil incarnate, and at the end of the game, Link has to combine his will with that of the divine, of the Windfish. Much like how in A Link to the Past, he touches the Triforce, and by doing so, purifies the land, by bringing back all the people that were killed by either Ganon or Aghanim, and saving the world. Spirit Tracks is another interesting example of a Zelda game trying to do its own thing, not really concerned with the games that came before, though admittedly, Spirit Tracks has a lot more familiar elements than Link's Awakening and Majora's Mask, but it's still unique, and because of that, it feels more special. It's more charming. It doesn't have Ganon in it, but it has Malladus. And Malladus is an interesting threat because you never really see his complete form. He takes Zelda's body as a catalyst for his reincarnation, which is such an interesting idea. Because Zelda is supposed to be pure, divine, but her spirit was stripped away from her body. And so she becomes this incarnation of evil incarnate. It's so cool, you know? And that's really the thing. People want familiar things. People want elements that they already know. That's the reason we're gonna get a Zelda movie, and I guarantee you that they're gonna bring Ganondorf into this. They're gonna have Link, they're gonna have Zelda, they're gonna have Octoroks, and whatever. But the only way that I can see for the series to prosper would be to not really dismiss the elements that are already in place, but deconstruct them and find ways in which they inspire players. Not the players, but even the creators themselves. And this is a very difficult process because they are scattered, fragmented. It would be difficult to find exactly what makes them special. Like, what makes Ganon special? It's difficult to know exactly how this villain works because he doesn't even resemble his past self of the previous games. Maybe if you play the NES games it's a little bit easier, but still. It's a little bit like finding the missing pieces of the Triforce, in a way. And reassembling that golden triangle would be the way to give the series new life. Forget familiarity. Forget nostalgia. Because they will kill Zelda if they go down this path. I said that I don't like Breath of the Wild. In theory, it takes the right approach. It tries to renew Zelda. But I feel like it's a little half-assed in a couple different ways. And as a result, it fails in execution. As for Tears of the Kingdom, I didn't even play it because I'm not interested. And that's really the problem here. I'm hoping to see that creativity again, that spark of imagination that made the first few games so special. And I believe it's there, but maybe they need to forget about what they have constructed so far and start from scratch. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I hope to see you guys next time. Make sure to check my cartoons if you're so willing. Okay, bye bye, see you then.